Housing stress is on the rise. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here. Let's have a look at an article from the Financial Review discussing the rise in housing stress. Now, all of us who follow the work of Martin North and DFA are familiar with just his arguments that mortgage stress is rising and the survey data that he collects. I'm noticing more and more that the mainstream media is referring to his work or sampling parts of his videos of what he does. So the mainstream and most people are starting to realize, well, that housing stress is going up. The latest chart that I managed to get, which is a bit old now, but it's from the RBA, just discussing those that are in arrears. Those are, if you have a look at this, the red part of this graph shows how many people are more than 150 days late on their mortgage. Now we're hearing, it's gone up to 1.5% from 0.5, so it's tripled. And this is all before these insane, lockdown world that we have now and drastic interest rate cuts. And we're hearing more and more in the bull property sector where people are spruiking that, Australians are years ahead on their mortgage. They're all sorted. They're fine. Now's the time to buy property. FOMO, get in there. Don't miss out, everyone. But I think we're going to see an increase in mortgage stress, and we're not going to really see the implications of everything that's happening until 6 months' time, later in this year. Even if the economy starts getting reactivated, people are allowed to go out. Spending habits are changing. Consumer habits are changing. We saw that in a previous video. People are tightening their belt. People aren't taking on as much debt, which is good in some ways. I really hope people will learn from this and prepare. Maybe I'm being a little too optimistic and naive. Anyway, let's have a look at this, guys. So housing stress on the rise. The number of households experiencing mortgage stress and at risk of losing their homes climbed by 100,000 to 1.4 million in April as dropping incomes took their toll on household cash flows despite the government's $130 billion job seeker scheme, a new report shows. Now, the job seeker scheme, it's a wage subsidy. I can't see how anyone can expect it to help. Sure, there'll be some people that it might supplement their income, but a lot of them are going to take a pay cut. And some businesses don't even want to take advantage of it because they've got to front the cash at the beginning and then get reimbursed later. And it's a cash flow issue if you've got no money coming in. It's tough being in business, particularly the smaller ones. An analysis of the poll conducted by Digital Finance Analytics, there you go, Martin North, exclusively for the Australian Financial Review, showed the number of borrowing households having difficulty paying their mortgage rose to 38.8% during April, up from 37.2% in March. So the way they've worded this, have DFA, did they exclusively do this poll for the Financial Review, or did the analysis of the data, the poll conducted by Australian Financial Review find this data? So a bit ambiguous there. But nonetheless, you can see more people. Wow, that's a lot higher than I anticipated. Nearly 40%. And I understand people were telling me in Martin's latest live stream that it's going up to 41%, or he anticipates it to. More than half, 51.5% of Tasmanian households were in mortgage stress. The highest proportion in the country, triggered by high property prices relative to income and the closure of the tourist sector in the state. Now, Tasmania is a beautiful state. If you haven't had the chance to go down there, I highly recommend it. I went down for a university field trip. Well, there was a conference. We went from Lonnie all the way down to Wellington. Lonnie to Hobart. Getting confused with my islands. And it was beautiful country down there, and I remember the houses. We were talking to some of the other local architecture students. They were quite affordable, particularly compared to Brisbane. And you get a beautiful house right near Hobart for 250 grand. But that's just showing my age, really, how long it's been since I've been out of university. I mean, that's even before I met Rachel when we went down there for that trip. And just the climb in houses there, it's just not related to wages. It's going to be tough for people there, particularly if they're dependent on Airbnb. Tasmania is one of the sectors where a huge number of Airbnb properties are flooding the market as well. DFA defines households where mortgage holders or renters as being in housing stress when their income is less than their overall expenses. That's a pretty harsh way of... yeah, you don't want to be in that situation where your income is less than your expenses. Then you're playing... well, then you're in trouble. Then you're in a lot of trouble. And that's going to happen to a lot of people. How many people are fortunate because the banks are letting them off, giving them a repayment holiday for 6 months? Then South Australia has the second highest number of households in mortgage stress at 41.7, followed by Western Australia at 40.7%. 2 in 5, 40% of households in Victoria were struggling to pay their mortgage, while a third of households in New South Wales and Queensland were in distress. Now, I'll just bring up this chart here to show everyone the cash rate. Interest rates are at record lows. They've never been this low in living memory. A few years ago, you would have asked if it would have been close to zero and people would have laughed at you. 10 years ago, can you imagine this happening in Australia? Could you imagine this happening in Australia? And people, 40% of households, half, or more than half in Tasmania. And yet people expect property to go up. We're not having any forced sales yet. What happens when job seeker or JobKeeper disappears? What happens when the banks stop giving everyone these mortgage holidays? Then they're going to have to start making tough decisions. People are going to start moving in together. People are going to sell those investment properties. People may need to sell their houses to get out of debt and rent. And in some ways, that's not the end of the world if you have forced to do that, if you can get out without being in negative equity. Because all these financial calculations, do they have a variable for stress? Do they have a variable for stress? Because you can attack your debts and pay them off. Or, well, no, there's interest rates so low, I'll put the money in this and try and make more. Is your stress higher or lower? So trouble on the horizon. The risk of default also rose during April, with 95,300 households, equating to 2.7% now facing the prospect of losing their home. Digital finance analytics principal Martin North, who estimates default risk based on assumptions, including the historical performance of loans in the area, overlaid with the local economy, said this was the highest level on record in the past decade. Running our projections forward and assuming the pandemic unlocking proceeds as expected, we will expect to see more than 41% of households in stress by August, he said. Depending on how the government support and banking repayment holidays are turned off, this could go higher still in September, as unemployment is expected to remain high in the coming months. The official numbers will understate the true unemployment because of the government schemes where people are still attached to their employers even if idle, so are not recorded as unemployed. Exactly. There's an advantage to JobKeeper. I understand why it's been implemented. But here's the question then. What would the real unemployment rate be if you counted that as part of it? Are these businesses being compensated for doing all the paperwork, doing the role of Centrelink, essentially? I guess they are. They get to keep their workers. So there's a benefit to it. But don't worry, guys. We'll all pay it back eventually, one way or another. Across the segments surveyed, young, growing families were the most exposed, including some recent first-time buyers. Well, we've all seen those articles where the young couple were happy to be featured in the newspaper for paying like 200 grand above reserve. How stupid is this going to look in the history books? Clowns paying hundreds of thousands of dollars more for a property just before we went into the worst recession in 300 years or 100 years, depending on how you look at it. It's a shame, though, now with modern technology, people aren't going to go through the microfiche anymore and look at the old newspaper articles. It's a real shame. Households living in the city fringe, often in new high-density estates, were also under mortgage pressure. Mr. North said a growing number of more affluent households were also struggling, with 3% at risk of defaulting on their mortgage. We are seeing young and wealthy households that are highly leveraged, with multiple mortgages and investment loans, and have been hit by dividend cuts and share market falls. They are now at risk of not meeting their mortgage repayments, he said. I mean, this is the thing. This is the thing. Being so highly leveraged. I saw another article by 60 Minutes about how people were trying to sell their houses, getting into trouble. Oh, we've got, a holiday house. We can't rent it out to Airbnb. We might not make repayments. Another guy unable to pay his water bill. So it's getting worrying, but we haven't really seen the ramifications for it because property moves so slow. So Victoria is the most exposed, the socialist capital of Australia. Victoria accounted for the most postcodes at risk of mortgage default, fueled by the recent run in home prices and sharp rise in unemployment. The largest pools of distress areas were in new developments on Melbourne's outer suburbs such as Berwick, Wirrabee, Pakenham and Cranbourne. More than 7,000 households in Berwick and Hackaway were in mortgage stress, while 228 were at risk of losing their homes. In the Wirrabee and Point Cook areas, 6,249 households were in distress and 425 were at risk of defaulting on their mortgages. Sydney, 5,500 or 5.6, within 2567 postcode were struggling to make mortgage repayments, while 110 households were at risk of default. I mean, there you go. We're starting to see the ramifications of an economic lockdown, guys, and it hasn't really been this long. It hasn't been this long. So rental stress is on the rise. Tenants were also feeling the mounting pressure of rising unemployment on their cash flow, with the number of households in rental stress rising by 2.7 percentage points to 39.2%, or 1.7 million since the lockdown started in late March. 1 in 3 Sydney renters, or 384,000, were struggling to pay their rent despite the softer rental market. That's even more concerning. With rents heading down, that's going to affect investment properties. It's definitely going to be... I definitely have less confidence in what the property bulls are saying. In Melbourne, more than a third, 36.9% of renting households, or a total of 329,000 tenants, were in distress, while 61% of renters in Ballarat West are at risk of not meeting their rental repayments. 61% out of Ballarat. Wow. So there we have it, everyone. There we have it. A large portion of people at risk of mortgage default, something that Martin North has been discussing for a long time, that now the mainstream media is finally starting to wake up to. Perhaps a little too late. Are you in this position? Are you at risk of being in default, or have you just been attacking your mortgage with gazelle intensity or going crazy? What advice would yours be to people that are in this situation? Maybe rent out a room, get other people in to increase your income. Another $50 a week, another $100 a week. It all helps. It all helps. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If you're a fan and you want to support us, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us via affiliate links at Amazon or eBay, or Independent Reserve and Kucoin. You can buy a merch from HeiseSays, use Gold Pass from Perth Mint, or you can also support us via PayPal. Take care, guys. See you next video.